Welcome to tonight's Salon. All Hallows, All Saints, All Souls. We celebrate this time of the year when everything is changing. We go from the heat of summer to the cold of winter. Leaves falling off the trees, animals burrowing into the ground, birds flying south. All of us preparing for the holidays, preparing for a time more indoors than out. So, I wanted to share some poems and fables and tales and some wondrous music from our brilliant maestro, McFarland Johnson, in residence, that we can share all of this together. So thank you for being here this evening. And those that are at home, thank you for joining us too. I'm going to start with a short excerpt from The Wasteland, T.S. Eliot's first masterpiece that came out 100 years ago, published in the Criterion magazine in Great Britain 100 years ago. And this is from the fifth section. It's called What the Thunder Said. After the torchlight red on sweaty faces, after the frosty silence in the gardens, after the agony in stony places, the shouting and the crying, prison and palace and reverberation of thunder of spring over distant mountains. He who was living is now dead. We who were living are now dying with a little patience. A woman drew her long hair back out tight and fiddled whisper music on those strings, and bats with baby faces in the violet light whistled and beat their wings, and crawled head downward, down a blackened wall, and upside down in air were towers, tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours, and voices singing out of empty cisterns and exhausted wells. In this decayed hole among the mountains, in the faint moonlight, the grass is singing over the tumbled graves about the chapel. There is the empty chapel, only the wind's home. It has no windows and the door swings. Dry bones can harm no one. Only a cock stood on the roof tree. Cocorico, cocorico. In a flash of lightning, then a damp gust bringing rain. That was written at a time just after World War I, when it could seem to many, especially to those in Great Britain and in France, that the world had ended in some way. So many had died for no clear purpose other than to have a war and see how many you could kill. So his writing, The Wasteland, addressed that and many other things, of course. And in a way, it's a great entry point to this season of the year when we look at this night when, as Cynthia Bourgeault, the Christian mystic and teacher, says, Triduum, which is the name, of course, applied to the Catholic liturgical circles, to those 3 great days in spring, to Maundy Thursday and Good Friday and Easter Sunday, because Triduum means 3 days. But tonight, it also refers to the autumnal Triduum, when we have Halloween, and then All Saints' Day, and then All Souls' Day. Though Halloween, by and large, is a secular day, not considered a holy day by any means, and All Saints and All Souls can be, well, a little esoteric. Some churches and communities celebrate them, many don't. And yet they do go together because both spring and fall Triduums deal with that passage from death to life, which is at the heart of the Christian tradition. And in fact, all mystical paths, but they do so in very different modes. For at Easter, the days are lengthening. The time of new growth is upon us, and we're moving into life and the vitality of spring into summer and eventually to harvest. Now, we're past harvest. Things are dying back, and so we find ourselves burrowing down into the earth, covering ourselves, drawing closer to the fire rather than closer to the sun. And so this season is one where we look and reflect on our lives, perhaps this past year, as well as the lives of those we love, families and friends that have passed, as well as the lives of those we admire. saints, holy ones, those that inspire us and give us more purpose in our lives. Halloween, that great Druidic celebration, is often lost in excess and revelry. But if you pay attention, it actually is asking us to acknowledge the false self. Yes, head out trick-or-treating dressed as your false self. Let the ghoulies and ghosties, long-legged beasties, and things that go bump in the night cavort as they will without causing us alarm. All shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. All long-leggedy things shall be well. The shadow-faced, we are then free on November the 1st to move into the most exquisite and subtle foretaste of the glory to come, the mystical communion of the saints. I can say that not Easter, but All Saints is the thinnest of the thin places between heaven and earth, where the boundaries between ourselves and all we have loved and deemed but lost, all we have grieved for, all the roads not taken in our lives are met in the gentle solace of yes. From there, having glimpsed on November 1st that all land is one land under the sea, we are then invited on November 2nd to return to our human condition and particularity, to acknowledge and grieve the ones that we have lost, and to prepare ourselves to live more deeply and courageously in this strange land, doing a dual walk that we humans seem cosmically appointed to traverse, poised at the intersection of the timeless with time, as T.S. Eliot said. We're looking to trod on that eternal path that leads to God and Christ and salvation, and this very much pragmatic day-to-day path that requires that we watch where we park and pay the bills and say thank you and clean up after ourselves. Those things work together, but they can often seem counter to one another. So these fall Triduum days are a time to do the profound inner work, to face our shadows and deep fears, death being for most people the scariest one of all, to taste that in ourselves which already lies beyond death, drink at its fountain, then to move back into our lives again, both humbled and steadied at that which lies beyond light and dark, beyond both life and death. Now, there are many traditions in the Old World, especially in Great Britain and Northern Europe, for Halloween and this time of the year. It was the time, actually, I found this interesting to discover that especially the far north of England and into Scotland, once you got to this time of the year, because they would call, in the Celtic tradition, Halloween was called Samhain, which is there are 6 major feast days during the year in the Druid tradition, and Samhain is what we would consider the same as Halloween. And once you get to Samhain, you could no longer fight. You could no longer have battles. You could no longer, maybe most importantly, steal someone else's cattle. You would take a break. You could no longer go hunting for the wild pig or the deer that were living in the highlands and the valleys, because that's when they were mating. And if you were to hunt them too much, you wouldn't have enough for the following year. So once you got to this time of harvest, you would harvest your animals and bring in your crops, and then you'd have a surplus, and you would have time to have meetings, to have celebrations, to practice religious rituals. And that was the beginning of the winter season, Samhain, and then over later into Christmas, and then into midwinter. So this was a very sacred, holy, and yet festive time, because you didn't have to put all of your energy into the day-to-day survival that you would during the summer. When you had the opportunity to grow, you would put all the energy there then, of course. But I love that about the no more battles. It was also said to be the time when the more ancient burial mounds that might be there, that the people that were living there even 2,000 or 3,000 years ago didn't know where they came from, because they were from 4,000 or 5,000 years old. So they would see that as a time when the people from the other side, the spirits from the other side, would more easily cross over. And you would find, if you go to look at some of these ancient burial sites or mounds or barrows, that they would often have trenches dug around them. And it is said those would be dug around them not only to keep people, living people, away, but also to keep those that were encased in the tombs away from the people. Because just as people and their spirits could move in to the other world could more easily move into this world. And that's maybe where a lot of our superstitions and our fears and all the monster and horror movies come from. A lot of that. You cross this line, and what'll happen? Will you be in danger? So death, divination, reading into the future, all of these things, and the burning of huge fires to celebrate, but also to chase away the darkness. And that would continue, of course, up till the very end of the year. So I have a poem here from a current poet, Bay Area poet, Thomas Sentinella, and it's called The Orders. And I first discovered this a number of years ago and really liked it so much, but could never find a way to use it until tonight. One spring night at the end of my street, God was lying in wait. A friend and I were sitting in his new sedan, like a couple of cops on surveillance, shooting the breeze to pass the time, chatting up the daydreams, the raw deals, the woulda, coulda, shouldas, the latest, can you believe that? As well as the little strokes of luck, the so-called triumphs, small and unforeseen, that kept us from cashing it all in. And God, who's famous for working in mysterious ways and capable of anything, took the form of a woman and a man, each dressed in dark clothes and desperate enough to walk up to the car and open the door. And God put a gun to the head of my friend, right against the brainstem where the orders go out, not only to the heart and the lungs, but to consciousness itself. A cold muzzle aimed where the oldest urges still have their day. The one that says, eat whatever's at hand. The one that wants only to screw. The one that will kill if it has to. And God said not to look at him, or he'd blow us straight to kingdom come. And God told us to keep our hands to ourselves as if she weren't that kind of girl. Suddenly, time was nothing. Our lives were cheap. The light in the car, cold light from a hospital, light from a morgue. And the moments that followed, if that's what they were, arrived with a nearly unbearable weight, until we had acquired a center of gravity as great as the planet itself. My friend could hardly speak. He was too busy trying not to die, which made me chatter all the more, as if words, even the most ordinary ones, had the power to return us to our lives. And behind my ad-libbed incantation, my counterspell to fear, the order still went out. Keep beating, keep breathing, you are not permitted to disappear. Even as one half of God kept bitching to the other half that we didn't have hardly no money at all. And the other half barked, I'm telling you to shut your mouth, and went on rummaging through the back seat, and no one at all looking out their window, no one coming home or going out, until two tall neighbors came walking toward us like unsuspecting saviors, and God grabbed the little we'd been given, the little we still had, and hustled on to the next dark street. Life can and does turn on a dime before we know it. Another chapter has begun. At times like this, it's great and fun, or scary and challenging, or both. But when a real and lasting end like death raises, then it is a whole nother ballgame. Two goddesses of death. I love that, actually. There's two goddesses of death. There are probably more, of course, but women always get to do the hard stuff. Kali, who is the Indian goddess of death, she is connected with Mahadevi, who's the sort of supreme goddess. But she is, Kali, that is the goddess of ultimate power, time, destruction, and change. She's connected with Shiva, and she's said to be the embodiment of the Shakti energy, which is the most powerful, incredible power in the universe, is the Shakti energy in the Hindu tradition, and she is the embodiment of that. Now, she's connected with death because she's all about change. She's all about what is called to happen. And so she has this very unique look to her. It's pretty terrifying. She's usually naked, blue or black, and has a skull necklace with anywhere from 20 to 100 skulls around her neck. She carries a trident, and she has 8 arms, by the way. She has a trident in one hand. She has a large scimitar kind of sword in another hand. 2 other hands are in particular mudras or positions of blessing. And then she has 1 foot up. 1 foot up, she's about to crush a body underneath her. Sometimes she's standing on her husband doing this, and sometimes she's on people that have been killed in a battle. Her tongue is hanging out, and she's often dripping with blood. So, I mean, it sounds pretty grim and horrible, but her tradition is very sacred to many people in the Hindu world. And so they will go to her temples and create altars for her and make offerings to Kali. Because Kali is not just seen as the one who comes in to kill. Kali's the power of the universe that also shows as the one that kills. Not unjustly, not like a murderer or something. God's hand in the world, bringing people on to the next life. Now, different but similar in some ways is the Mexican goddess La Muerta, Nuestra Señora de la Santa Muerta, the Spanish for Our Lady of Holy Death, often just called Santa Muerta or La Muerta. And the figures you see at the Day of the Dead, where you have the sort of the skull painted face and the big teeth and the usually flowers and things around the eyes. Well, that's what she looks like. Once again, very beloved God figure. Now, this is in both the sort of traditional religious setting, but also in the Catholic setting, because of course in Catholicism there are many saints. And Santa Muerta is not a saint as in someone who physically lived in the world, but is seen as the embodiment of this death energy. And I know from what I've heard that especially since the rise of all the drug cartels and all the terrible killings that have happened on the border and in other parts of Central America the last 20 years or so, the cult, so to speak, of Santa Muerta has become that much more popular. Not because they're celebrating it, but because they're trying to find a way to make sense of it. And Santa Muerta seems to help with that. So in our tradition, usually our Anglo-Saxon tradition, we don't really talk about death or look at death. We sort of deal with it when we have to, and then we want to move on. Because it's scary. It's a mystery. It's overwhelming. It causes a lot of sadness and sense of loss. But it's something we all work with, we all deal with, right? I mean, we can't avoid death. Those that we love, those that we don't really know at all. And knowing that ourselves, too, at one point, will be in those final moments. So there's something of great value in looking at death more closely and trying to perhaps understand it, at least for ourselves. So I'm going to tell you a little fairy tale from Grimm's Brothers. It's called Godfather Death. Once upon a time, that's how they always start, right? Once upon a time, there was a family. husband and wife, and they had 12 children. The 13th child came along, and the father said to himself, I have to find a godfather. So he goes out on the street, looks around, tries to find someone to be the godfather for the 13th child. And he runs into God. And he says, hey, can you be the godfather? God said, sure, I'll be the godfather. I'm God. I'd be a great godfather. The man says, hey, wait a minute. Aren't you the guy that always makes sure the poor stay poor and the rich stay rich? I don't want you to be his godfather. So he keeps looking, runs into someone else. I'll be the godfather. Great. I'm the devil. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Wait a minute now. The devil wants to be his godfather? You always torment people and make life terrible. I don't want you to be the godfather. So who does he run into next? Death. And death, the father says to himself, well, death is as free and equal with everyone. Everyone dies. So this is probably a good godfather. So death becomes the godfather, goes to the church the next Sunday when the son is baptized, godfather death. Now, as the son grows up, he gets to meet with godfather death and talk to him now and again. And death says, I'm going to show you some secrets. Come with me out in the woods. He shows him some special herbs. And he says, you are going to be a great doctor, a wonderful healer. People are going to love you. And if there's ever a problem you don't know what to do, give them some of this herb. They eat that, they'll be better. However, if I say someone has to die, you have to listen to me, and you can't try and trick me or I'll get very mad at you. And the boy says, oh, of course, no problem, of course, of course. He studies, he becomes a doctor, he becomes a healer, and all is going great. He's making money, he's powerful. One time, the local king is sick, terrible sick, calls this famous physician now to his bedside and says, please help me, I'm dying. Now he knows, the physician knows, that if death is standing at the head of the bed by the person's head, and only he can see death, of course, if death is standing at the head of the bed, that means he can give the person the herbs and the person will get better. But if death is standing at the foot of the bed by the person's feet, don't touch it, death's going to take him. So what happens? Death is standing by the foot of the bed for the king. What does the boy, now a physician, do? He turns the bed around. Now death is standing at his head. The boy gives him the herbs. The king gets better. Hey, this is great. Godfather Death drags him to the side afterward and says, what are you doing? What did I tell you? You can't do this. If you do this, I'm going to get really mad at you. I'll forgive you this time because you're my godson and I love you. But do not do it again. Well, you know what's going to happen next. Who gets sick next? The king's beautiful daughter. The boy physician says, oh my gosh, I have to save her. She's so beautiful. I love her. King says, if you save her, you can marry her. You'll be the new king. Where's Godfather Death standing? At the foot of the bed. Boy turns the bed around again, gives the herbs to the girl. The girl starts to get a little bit better. Godfather Death drags him out of there into a cavern. And what's in the cavern? Thousands, millions of candles, all burning all over the cavern. Some tall, some very short, some about to go out, some just newly lit. And Godfather Death says to the physician, these are all the lives of the world. When that candle goes out, they are gone. The king was supposed to go out. The daughter was supposed to go out. You stopped me. You know what this means, don't you? No, but you don't understand. I love her. I have to be king. It's what I'm supposed to be doing. I can tell. Please, can't you light another candle for me and let that candle that is me now go out? Can't you move it around somehow? So Death moves over to the candle, moves to light another candle, takes his sigh, and the physician is gone. But just as he's fading out, Godfather Death tells him, don't mess with death. Family doesn't matter. Death is what counts. They don't call them Grimm brothers for nothing. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, or "Madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, so gently you came rapping, so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore?" This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore," merely this and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the grave and stirred decorum of the countenance it wore, though the crest be shorn and shaven thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door. Bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." I'm going to cut to the last two lines because it goes on and on. "Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend," I shrieked upstarting, "get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Whew. Okay, one quick one. Another from Grimm. There was once a mother who had a little 7-year-old boy. He was so handsome and lovable that no one could look at him without liking him. And she herself worshiped him above everything else in the world. He suddenly became ill, and God took him to himself. His mother could not be comforted and wept day and night. Soon afterwards, after her son had been buried, he appeared at night in the places where he had sat and played during his life. And if the mother wept, he wept also. When morning came, he disappeared. When the mother would not stop crying, he became one night in the little white shroud in which he'd been laid in his coffin, and with his wreath of flowers around his head. He stood on the bed at her feet and said, "Oh, mother, do stop crying, or I shall never fall asleep in my coffin, for my shroud will not dry because of all thy tears which fall upon it." The mother was afraid when she heard that and wept no more. The next night the child came again and held a little light in his hand and said, "Look, mother, my shroud is nearly dry, and I can rest in my grave." Then the mother gave her sorrow into God's keeping and bore it quietly and patiently, and the child came no more, but slept in his little bed beneath the earth. Here's one called On Passing a Graveyard. May perpetual light shine upon the faces of all who rest here. May the lives they lived unfold further in spirit. May all their past travail find ease in the kindness of day. May the remembering earth mind every memory they brought. May the rains from the heavens fall gently upon them. May the wildflowers and grasses whisper their wishes into light. May we reverence the village of presence in the stillness of this silent field. That's from John O'Donohue, from a book of his blessings. It's important to remember that because, of course, it's easy to focus on the gnarly with death, and that's a lot of it, but it's, I believe, a relatively temporary part, meaning we go through that, and the one that is dying, of course, goes through that, but that each being that dies is going on to something else, another world perhaps, maybe heaven. I don't believe they just stop, the body dies and nothing is left. God hates waste. God uses energy again and again and again, and so whenever someone dies, that energy that was them goes on. The Buddhists, the Tibetan Buddhists anyway, talk about the only thing that passes from this world to the next is the consciousness, the awareness. And so it's not that it's Burke or Caroline or any of you that is traveling, you know, like you're taking a trip, so you bring your suitcase and your winter coat and your umbrella just in case, and you go over to somewhere. No, it's the body dies, and most of the time the ego and the identity and all the stuff that theoretically makes you you most likely doesn't travel on. But the intrinsic awareness that's within all of us that makes us truly alive to begin with is what travels on. And so from that Buddhist point of view, it is said as if you can learn to find what that awareness is in yourself, paying attention to it, then when it is time for you to pass on, it's not as chaotic or difficult as it might be. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But I find that reassuring myself. I have a poem here from Philip Appelman that I wanted to share with you because a good deal of this question of death and dying and what happens afterwards is what we talk about here. We don't know what is talked about on the other side. We don't know if they talk on the other side, but they're living it or being in it or doing it, whatever it is. So we are full of theories, full of ideas. There's ideas of reincarnation. There's ideas of heaven and hell. There's ideas that you're buried and that's it. There's nothing left. There are many different thoughts about how it works and how it doesn't. I've never seen anything that convinced me that it was the right answer. But it's something for us all to consider. But this poem speaks about an element that perhaps travels on with the person that has passed. It's called Birthday Card to My Mother. The toughness indoor people have, the will to brave confusion in mohair sofas, crochet doilies, challenging in every tidy corner some bit of the outdoor drift and sag, the tenacity in 40 quarts of cherries up for winter, gallon churns of sherbet at family reunions, 50,000 suppers cleared away, the tempering of rent man at the front door, hanging on light bills overdue, sons off to war or buried, daughters taking on the names of strangers. You have come through the years of wheelchairs, loneliness, a generation of pain, knotting the joints like ancient apple trees. You always knew this was no world to be weak in, where best friends withered to old phone numbers in far-off towns, where the sting of children is always sharper than serpent's teeth, where love itself goes shifting and slipping away to shadows. You have survived it all. Come through the wreckage and triumph hard at the center, but spreading gentleness around you. Nowhere by your bright hearth has the dust of bitterness lain unswept. Today, thinking back, thinking ahead to other birthdays, I lean upon your courage and sign this card, as always, with love. That would be a pretty awesome card to get, huh? This is another poem by Thomas Sentinella. It's called "In the Evening We Shall Be Examined on Love." And it won't be multiple choice, though some of us would prefer it that way. Neither will it be an essay, which tempts us to run on when we should be sticking to the point, if not together. In the evening there shall be implications. Our fear will change to complications. No cheating, we'll be told, and we'll try to figure the cost of being true to ourselves. In the evening, when the sky has turned that certain blue, blue of exam books, blue of no more daily evasions, we shall climb the hill as the light empties and park our tired bodies on a bench above the city and try to fill in the blanks. And we won't be tested like defendants on trial, cross-examined till one of us breaks down, guilty as charged. No, in the evening after the day has refused to testify, we shall be examined on love, like students who don't even recall signing up for the course and now must take their orals, forced to speak for once from the heart and not off the top of their heads. And when the evening is over and it's late, the student body is asleep, even the great teachers retired for the night, we shall stay up and run back over the questions, each in our own way. What's true? What's false? What unknown quantity will balance the equation, and what it would mean years from now to look back and know we did not fail. A Blessing by James Wright. Just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, twilight bounds softly forth on the grass, and the eyes of those two Indian ponies darken with kindness. They have come gladly out of the willows to welcome my friend and me. We step over the barbed wire into the pasture, where they have been grazing all day alone. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness. That we have come, they bow shyly as wet swans. They love each other. There is no loneliness like theirs. At home once more, they began munching the young tufts of spring in the darkness. I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms, for she has walked over to me and nuzzled my left hand. She is black and white. Her mane falls wild on her forehead. And the light breeze moves me to caress her long ear that is as delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. Suddenly I realized that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom. Here's one from H.P. Lovecraft, a little dark, but we have to have at least one more. Through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber, past the wan-mooned abysses of night, I have lived o'er my lives without number. I have sounded all things with my sight, and I struggle and shriek ere the daybreak, being driven to madness with fright. I have whirled with the earth at the dawning when the sky was a vaporous flame. I have seen the dark universe yawning where the black planets roll without aim, where they roll in their horror unheeded without knowledge or luster or name. I had drifted o'er seas without ending, under sinister gray-clouded skies, that the many-forked lightning is rending, that resound with hysterical cries, with the moans of invisible demons that out of the green waters rise. I have plunged like a deer through the arches of the hoary primordial grove, where the oaks feel the presence that marches and stalks on where no spirit dares rove. And I flee from a thing that surrounds me and leers through the dead branches above. I have stumbled by cave-ridden mountains that rise barren and bleak from the plain. I have drunk of the fog-fetid fountains that ooze down to the marsh and the main. And in hot, cursed tarns I have seen things I care not to gaze on again. I have scanned the vast ivy-clawed palace. I have trod its untenanted hall, where the moon rising up from the valleys shows the tapestried things on the wall, strange figures discordantly woven that I cannot endure to recall. I have peered from the casements in wonder at the moldering meadows around, at the many-roofed village laid under the curse of a grave-girdled ground, and from rows of white urn-carven marble I listen intently for sound. I have haunted the tombs of the ages. I have flown on the pinions of fear, where the smoke-belching Erebus rages, where the jocals loom snow-clawed and drear, and in realms where the sun of the desert consumes what it never can cheer. I was old when the pharaohs first mounted the jewel-decked throne by the Nile. I was old in those epochs uncounted, when I, and I only, was vile, and man, yet untainted and happy, dwelt in bliss on the far Arctic isle. Oh, great was the sin of my spirit, and great is the reach of its doom. Not the pity of heaven can cheer it, nor can respite be found in the tomb. Down the infinite eons come beating the wings of unmerciful gloom. Through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber, past the wan-mooned abysses of night, I have lived o'er my lives without number. I have sounded all things with my sight, and I struggle and shriek ere the daybreak, being driven to madness with fright. That HP, such an imagination on that boy. So I have one that I'd like to read that's a little bit different, but it also is sort of speaks to this, the pain and suffering that we go through, that anyone can go through, can be what drives them to any number of things, and can be what gives them a sense of identity. And sometimes that's justified, and sometimes it's perhaps not. This one is called the powwow at the end of the world. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after an Indian woman puts her shoulder to the Grand Coulee Dam and topples it. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, so I shall, after the floodwaters burst each successive dam downriver from the Grand Coulee. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the floodwaters find their way to the mouth of the Columbia River as it enters the Pacific and causes all of it to rise. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the first drop of floodwater is swallowed by that salmon waiting in the Pacific. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall. After that salmon swims upstream through the mouth of the Columbia and then past the flooded cities, broken dams, and abandoned reactors of Hanford. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall. After that salmon swims through the mouth of the Spokane River, as it meets the Columbia, then upstream until it arrives in the shallows of a secret bay on the reservation where I wait alone. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall. After that salmon leaps into the night air above the water, throws a lightning bolt at the brush near my feet, and starts the fire which will lead all of the lost Indians home. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after we Indians have gathered around the fire with that salmon who has 3 stories it must tell before sunrise. One story will teach us how to pray. Another story will teach us how to laugh for hours. And the third story will give us a reason to dance. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, when I am dancing with my tribe during the powwow at the end of the world. Eternity, the timeless, the spaceless, the endless, the traceless, here, now. Sun makes the day new, the teeny green plants emerge from earth, birds are singing the sky into place. There is nowhere else I want to be but here. I lean into the rhythm of your heart to see where it will take us. We gallop into a warm southern wind. I link my legs to yours and we ride together toward the ancient encampment of our relatives. Where have you been, they ask. What has taken you so long? That night, after eating, singing, and dancing, we lay together under the stars. We know ourselves to be part of mystery. It is unspeakable. It is everlasting. It is for keeps. This is a song I learned many years ago by one of my teachers. Caroline and I learned this. Joe Miller. Joe Miller was the head of the Theosophical Society in San Francisco. He had a place on Mason Street, one floor, that I think had been gifted to the society back in the 30s or something. And he and his wife Gwen lived there. They were, at the time, they seemed so old. They must have been 80. At the time, it seemed old. Not so much now. But Joe was an ex-vaudevillian and follower of spiritual paths. So he followed Buddhism and Sufism and Christianity and all kinds of other things. So Joe would sing and Gwen would play the piano. She'd usually write the music. When people die, I do not cry. When old friends turn, sadness reigns, but not for long. For joy is the natural state. This is the key to eternity. Yes, this is the key to eternity. The words and the music and the melody make our hearts one, so you can see that you immortal are, and you have but to be. This is the key to eternity. Yes, this is the key to eternity. The words and the music and the melody make our hearts one, so you can see that you immortal are, and you have but to be. And he'd always end it with a, yeah. Here's another one from Joy Harjo, the great Native American poetess, for calling the spirit back from wandering the earth in its human feet. Put down that bag of potato chips, that white bread, that bottle of pop. Turn off the cell phone, computer, and remote control. Open the door. Then close it behind you. Take a breath offered by the friendly winds. They travel the earth gathering essences of plants to clean. Give it back with gratitude. If you sing, it will give your spirit lift to fly to the stars' ears and back. Acknowledge this earth who has cared for you since you were a dream, planting itself precisely within your parents' desire. Let your moccasined feet take you to the encampment of the guardians who have known you before time, who will be there after time. They sit before the fire that has been there without time. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters. Be respectful of the small insects, birds, and animal people who accompany you. Ask their forgiveness for the harm we humans have brought down upon them. Don't worry. The heart knows the way, though there may be high-rises and interstates, checkpoints, armed soldiers, massacres, wars, and those who will despise you because they despise themselves. The journey might take you a few hours, a day, a year, a few years, 100, 1,000, or even more. Watch your mind. Without training it, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by the thieves of time. Do not hold regrets. When you find your way to the circle, to the fire kept burning by the keepers of your soul, you will be welcomed. You must clean yourself with cedar, sage, or other healing plant. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame. Let go the pain you are holding in your mind, your shoulders, and your heart, all the way to your feet. Let go the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are heading in our direction. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. These helpers take many forms: animal, element, bird, angel, saint, stone, or ancestor. Call your spirit back. It may be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would to a beloved child. Welcome your spirit back from its wandering. It may return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after being lost for so long. Your spirit will need to sleep a while after it is bathed and given clean clothes. Now you can have a party. Invite everyone you know who loves and supports you. Keep room for those who have no place else to go. Make a giveaway, and remember, keep the speeches short. Then you must do this. Help the next person find their way through the dark. Thank you all so much for being here tonight, and thank you all that are at home or somewhere. It's been a joy to share this with you. I hope you've enjoyed it. All the dots didn't necessarily connect, but hopefully it was a fun ride. So please join us if you can. Come on in. We have some wonderful refreshments, and we can visit and talk a little bit if you like. It's about 8:13. Yeah, so a little bit past time, but not too bad.